Good morning, everyone. My topic for this conference is understanding the direct relationship between class discussions, confidence, and improved communication skills that instills positivity in psychological capital, an observation of postgraduate international students. My name is Dr. Anna Sekhar, and I'm from the School of Business in Torrens University, Australia. Let me begin this presentation by trying to first define what is positive psychological capital. Positive psychological capital can be, in very simple and candid terms, defined as positive and developmental state of individuals. When we talk about psychological capital, it is characterized by hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. This paper, or this research, I must say, probes into the direct impact that participating in class discussions have on creating a positive psychological capital. So, what actually drew me to this research? Like any other lecturer, I was involved in a traditional learning and teaching pedagogy. But when I was handed in some management units, I knew for the fact that these management units needed to be conducted in a more interactive fashion. So which means I had to transform myself from the traditional learning and teaching to a more participatory style of teaching. So my next question was, how do I go about engaging my students? What I did was a simple observation on how students would like to be engaged, how I can get their attention, and how I can get them to participate better in class activities. So this means I had to transform my teaching style. The data which I had informally gathered was basically for the purpose of improving my teaching, nothing else. I had no other intention in my mind excepting to see how I can better my teaching capacity and my way of teaching, if I may put it that way. So this observation continued for a while, and that actually drew me into thinking, why not research in this area? So here we go. So what is my research focus? My research focus has been on how we can increase confidence and communication in students by getting them to participate in class discussion. It is a known fact that majority of international students, I'm being very generic when I say this, I'm not going to mean any one particular group. It's a very generic observation that international students come with a bit of cultural shyness and inhibition. And this could be associated with a language barrier. So my research has been to prove that enhanced communication and confidence can create that optimism, hope, resilience, and self-efficacy, all of these which are the tenets of psychological capital. Now, what was the research method I wanted to adopt? Being a qualitative person, I must admit, I decided to move in the path of qualitative research methodology. I also wanted to have accuracy in my results. So what did I do? I wanted to observe the students. So the methodology I had adopted there under qualitative was a complete observer method. When you use complete observer method, it helps us authenticate as to how confidence and communication have a positive correlation on psychological capital. I must also say there could be much better methods, but my sole purpose, as I mentioned earlier, was to find out how best I could improve my teaching. So it was all about improving teaching to start with. That's how this research took birth. This research could be extended to both undergraduate and postgraduate classes, but that said, since I have been teaching the postgraduate classes only, my focus has been on international postgraduate students. So now, let us try to see a comparison between traditional versus participatory learning pedagogy. So what is traditional learning? You can see from that little picture over there that under traditional learning, the educator is the repository of knowledge. The educator assumes equal learning from all students. And I must say that the method of learning is more recitation and memorizing. I'm sure some of us, at least when I grew up back in India, I must say that it was more of recitation, which I could barely do, and memorizing, which I could never do. I could have the concepts in my head, or I was good at retaining the concepts, but I could never memorize things. Things were told in my own words. But under traditional learning and teaching, the better you memorize, the richer your reward. There is minimal classroom participation and minimal scope for critical thinking. Relating it to my personal experience, I must again say that I have spent more time standing outside the classroom because I bothered my teachers and my lecturers with enough of questions which they hated me for. That said, textbooks serve as the main basis for learning. In sharp contrast, what is participatory learning? Here we go. The picture again shows it is a learning environment where people work effectively and respectfully. It is a team. Students learn to compromise. It's not my way or the highway. They work with flexibility. They value individual contributions. The educator facilitates learning and motivates students. Students also gather as much information from their peers through active discussion. So what I did now, with my interest getting further depth, I decided to do a 2x2 matrix for the purpose of this research. So what is this 2x2 matrix? Participatory versus traditional learning matrix. I've taken participatory learning on the one side and traditional learning on the other. I've used two entities, all participate and some participate. So now, let's go to each of those blocks. The first one, under participatory learning, yes, all participate, and under traditional learning, all do not participate. So that explains why, N. The next one, when it comes to participatory learning, all participate. And when you take under traditional learning, yes, some participate. So it's Y, Y. The next one, when it comes to participatory learning, some participate. When it comes to traditional learning, all do not participate. So Y, N. And last but not the least, under participatory learning, some participate, and under traditional learning, also some participate. So it's Y, Y. So that explains the matrix. So now, after having seen the matrix, we know that under traditional learning, not all want to participate. So there is a bit of that shyness. So what is that shyness? It is that psychological state of discomfort that affects social contact. Students are happy to either text or to either mail each other rather than a face-to-face communication. There is an inherent shyness due to language and cultural barriers. So, what role does participatory learning do here? It helps break this barrier. What happens in a participatory learning is the class is broken into groups. Discussion and mutual learning is facilitated. You have the encouragement from the educator and you have a peer-to-peer motivation. Moving further, I am going to introduce the complete observer method too. But before I do that, we must understand that under participatory learning, it has a dual effect. One is improve creativity and the other one is to improve critical thinking. Students are able to better retain the information and that helps them to converse with their fellow peers with confidence. So what happens under complete observer method and what did I do? I divided my class lectures. It's a 3-hour lecture block, which I divided into 2 parts. The first part is the participative lecture. The second part is wherein I divided the class into 3 groups or 2 groups sometimes. And I threw open a topic which is with relevance to what we have discussed that week. I never told the students that I'm observing them. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to eliminate the Hawthorne effect. I wanted them to be as natural as possible. I did not want them to have that conscious thing that somebody is observing them, so we need to act as though we are participating. No, that's not accuracy in results. I wanted accurate results to see who is actually participating, who is not, and what is the progress level every week. Quite interestingly, what were my observations? I noticed positivity was on the rise as a trimester progresses. Students who were quiet were now slowly displaying some increased motivation and interaction. Class was becoming more robust with its discussions. There were enhanced confidence which were quite visible. Students came better prepared to class, and that was quite overt because in the first part of the lecture, the class participation was becoming more intense now. Fantastic results. It was becoming a cohesive class environment where if one student doesn't participate in class, the other one says, hey, I haven't heard your voice. What is your opinion on this? Can you tell something? Can you shed some light? So that is how students were now beginning to interact. So what could be the outcome then? This little diagram that I have created is for the purpose of this research. So what we notice here is a learning outcome in a cohesive class environment. A cohesive class leads you to a motivated learning group, and both of them contribute towards self-initiation, a better class participation, enhanced confidence in communication, and of course, a better learning outcome. Now, these are the actual observations I did, as I mentioned, for the purpose of improving my teaching. I did not want to reveal the student details, so I just numbered them from 1 to 35, which is the strength of my class. And the week is on the vertical axis. Every bar that you see represents a student. I must say that this was the very first observation I did when the unit was handed over to me. So now, I must also admit that this was a unit, or this was the trimester wherein I was very busy having or adopting a traditional learning and teaching methodology, and that reflected on the results. Not all the students were willing to participate for the reasons being they still had that bit of an inhibition. They were not comfortable. So that's the reason you see some gaps there. The numbers on every bar represents how many weeks a student has participated. So which means this shed a good light to me that traditional learning and teaching does not work to engage the students. Now, refinements were happening in my teaching. Then came the next trimester when I had a class of 35 students again, but this time my teaching style was more participatory. I found immense progress from where I had started. Most of the students were now being actively involved. So my observations usually started from week 3 and went up to week 10, usually, because that's when the class is actually complete with all the enrollments from week 3. So here we go. Even if students were late in enrolling in some extreme circumstances, what I noticed is everyone took an effort to participate. They were getting better at it, and the results were also displaying that. Another interesting observation that I did was in that same trimester, I had 2 classes. One was the bigger number, the other is a smaller number, a very small class of 11 students. This was very interesting to see that it was a smaller class, but they familiarized between themselves very fast. They were wanting to discuss more. So you can find a more consistent kind of a result when the class size is smaller. So this means my participatory learning was even more effective in a smaller classroom environment where students were happy to participate between one another. They knew each other much faster. Then came the first part of 2020, a class with 29 students where I continued my participatory learning much more refined than how I started with it. And the results were commendable. Every student had participated unless and until they were absent for the whole trimester, which I couldn't do anything about. So here we go. The results looked more consistent. It looked much more pleasing to my eye. That said, after the first part of the trimester in the first leg of 2020, when the medical pandemic set in, the latter part of the trimester became an online class. Since students had familiarized themselves with or between themselves with the face-to-face environment, now the online was much easier. They knew who they were talking to and who they were arguing against, etc. So therefore, there was not much change in the result. It continued. Rather than having it as a face-to-face, now the argument is happening over the computer. That's it. It's an online environment, virtually. But that said, the second half of 2020, when it was completely online, showed a bit of a different result. Some students who hadn't seen their peers face-to-face were quite reluctant to talk. And it being online, there was no compulsion that students had to be in class. They could listen to the recorded lectures too. So there we go. You have some zeros sitting there. So I have also created a symbiotic relationship between participatory learning, confidence, and communication. So when you have participation in class discussion, it reduces that inhibition and cultural shyness. It enhances confidence and communication, leading to a better outcome. Summary of my research. We've tried to understand the difference between traditional versus participatory learning. We've also tried to discuss very succinctly how participatory learning presents a completely different caricature with a varying degree of perseverance by students and peer-to-peer motivation. Your complete observer method, where you do not tell the students you are observing, you try to minimize that Hawthorne effect or eliminate the Hawthorne effect, helps uncover the positive role played by class participation towards building confidence and communication. There is also the ability of the facilitator to transform to participatory learning. And remembering the fact that when we allow students to participate in class, they knowingly or unknowingly shed their inhibition. They come out of the shell, and that helps increase positive psychological capital. Now, I must also say that I have been quite focused on this research because I am trying to build a leadership triangle or a leadership framework wherein I am trying to bring in the fact that when you have effective communication, it helps in creating effective leadership. And that effective communication emanates from participatory learning. So what is the further scope of this research? The further scope of this research is, number one, since I have now got into a formal research of this area, I wanted to gather data much more formally. All that I did now was an informal gathering of data for the purpose of improving my own teaching, nothing with intention of further research. But now that I have decided to step into this area as a research paper, I've submitted my application to the university's ethics committee for approval towards data collection. My aim is to collect data from a different unit to see how participatory learning works in that different unit. I also want to analyze much more as to whether a face-to-face learning is better or an online learning is better to have class participation. And I want to draw the conclusions surrounding effective learning and teaching pedagogy for both face-to-face and online. Possibly participatory learning works much better for a face-to-face than for an online, but I just want to do that research. So that is the end of my presentation. And these are the references, a small bit of the references that I have used for this presentation. Thank you very much.